23XI Racing and FRM Motorsports have been denied their preliminary injunction request. Meanwhile, the sanctioning body held the State of the Sport address to address the future of the playoffs, a potential new OEM, and so much more. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, my name's Taylor Kitchen and welcome to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we do motorsports media your way, talking about NASCAR all the time. And there's two key topics to discuss today. First up, the preliminary injunction, and second, the state of the sport, where we're going to break down everything that was talked about from Steve O'Donnell and Steve Phelps about where the sport is headed. But let's start off with the obvious breaking news that actually broke right in between their state of the sport address with the preliminary injunction. Judge Frank D. Whitney announced today that he is not granting 23XI Racing and FRM Motorsports their preliminary injunction. It was denied. During the hearing, the teams argued that they could lose their drivers and their sponsors if the request was denied. They also argued that the financial impact that the teams would have if they were to run as open cars could be detrimental to the longevity of their teams. The key word in here is could. It is the could of it all that I think was the downfall of their argument. Because according to the judge, he feels the team did not provide sufficient enough evidence to prove that they would suffer immediate irreparable harm, saying, quote, "At this stage, the teams are no closer to irreparable harm than they are to the command, 'Drivers, start your engines,' at the first race of the 2025 season." The teams did issue a statement on social media about the ruling, and though they are pleased with the court's decision to expedite this case and put it on the fast track, they also say that they do plan to appeal this decision by the judge. The reason this preliminary injunction was so important for these teams to file is because it would allow these teams to run as open cars or as chartered cars under the 2025 charter agreement until the lawsuit is taken care of. And it would allow them to compete without signing the provisions that waives the team's ability to file an antitrust lawsuit against NASCAR. And as NASCAR requires that all open car and chartered teams sign this provision negating their right to sue the sanctioning body, it puts the teams in a bit of a pickle in this whole situation. So the fact that this case is going to be expedited and put on the fast track, according to the judge, is crucial in this situation to allow these teams to get to Daytona with a decision in hand, but we will see where things go from here. Now let's head into the State of the Sport address, where the two main Steves of NASCAR, Steve O'Donnell and Steve Phelps, spoke to the media about where the sport is currently and where it's heading, talking about the playoff format, Martinsville, new OEMs potentially, everything that we've been wondering and more they talked about. So let's just talk about the main talking points that they discussed, and we'll go from there. First up, Steve Phelps talked about the small gains that we've made as a sport, talking about over the past 3 seasons, how attendance at the tracks has increased. Though it was single-digit increases, it's still a positive for the sport. And he expects those numbers to increase next year, as he's expecting that the Clash of Bowman Gray will be a sellout. And along with those gains, he talked about the hardships that the sport had to overcome this season to make those gains possible, talking about the 3 big events of the season, the 600, the Clash, and the Chicago Street Race, how they were all impacted by rain. Outside of the Daytona 500, arguably the 3 largest events on the NASCAR calendar in the first half of the season saw double-digit drops in the TV ratings, as these races had to either be rain delayed, postponed, rain shortened. All of it overall was chaos. And talking about the Clash in particular, he called it a financial bath, having to move the race up a day, but ultimately it was the right decision. He said all that leading into where we are now at the end of the 2024 season with the TV ratings. We are now in the positive, which is very good, and hopefully that'll continue next year. Moving on to a conversation about charters. Everyone wants to know NASCAR's stances on the charter negotiation, and to put it bluntly, Steve Phelps said, "We are not going to negotiate in the media about our charters." They did not answer any additional questions about the charters during the State of the Sport address, which I don't blame them. They are in active litigation, probably for the best. He did say, though, that they're happy that 32 of the 36 charter holders re-signed or extended the agreement. He also talked about how those that signed the agreement are big beneficiaries of this new deal, where they're getting more TV revenue, which should help the teams financially next year and beyond. Like I said, the timing was perfect as they're talking about all of this. The decision comes out about the preliminary injunction. They didn't comment on any of that. And they moved on to talking about the competition side of the sport. What we have seen so far with this Gen 7 car, what we've seen this year, the gains that we've made, and also some of the hardships that we still have to endure with the competition side of the sport. Steve O'Donnell emphasized the stats this year. We have 18 different winners with 10 different teams, which is pretty impressive. This season also has the 3 closest finishes in NASCAR history, which is a testament to the racing that we have and the product of the Gen 7 car. Outside of the project of the Gen 7 car, he said the folks at the R&D Center are working really hard and these teams and these drivers are really stepping up the competition. Revolving around all this, though, is the playoffs, because the playoffs is really what is promoting these drivers to race each other so damn hard every single week. And trust me, the playoff format was addressed. Jeff Gluck asked a brilliantly worded question talking about how Steve Phelps had made a comment about how we have the 4 most deserving drivers in the championship 4 and how they really played to the strengths of the playoff system to get themselves where they need to be. However, Jeff Gluck, along with this conversation, said, by the way, your championship 4, none of them are leading in major statistical categories. And with that all said, it begged the question, is this format still the best way for NASCAR to crown a champion? Is this format the best way for NASCAR to determine a champion? And what Steve Phelps and Steve O'Donnell both said in their following statements made complete sense to me, and I knew what was coming. The playoffs are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. The playoff system has admittedly produced really exciting racing, and Steve Phelps even said, if you're going to ask me how the racing has been the past 9 weeks in the playoffs, it's never been better. This format forces these drivers to race their guts out and puts them in situations where their backs are against the wall, and it produces incredible competition and entertainment from that. However, we've seen many situations this year where the playoff format has put NASCAR and these drivers in impossible situations. Steve O'Donnell said what he saw at Martinsville pissed him off. It pissed a lot of people at NASCAR off because they know better. He reiterated to the media today that they will have a rule in the rule book for next year that will punish the OEMs for race manipulation, and said that they talked to the OEMs and shared their expectations for this weekend and going forward. But I think we can all admit that we want to have situations like we had at Martinsville without this playoff format that we have. Steve O'Donnell and Steve Phelps did admit that there are opportunities to tweak the playoff system and that they will look at it during the offseason to see how this format could look going forward. So for all of us that are hoping for a more fair and more valid way of producing a rightful champion at the end of the NASCAR season, it does look like NASCAR will take a look at this playoff format and figure out what needs to be done going forward into 2025. As for some quicker updates, I'm just going to go down a list here. According to Steve Phelps, the Xfinity Series will remain the Xfinity Series next year. Xfinity will come back as the title sponsor in 2025. We've all heard rumblings that a different track could host the championship race in 2026, and when Steve O'Donnell was asked this, he said yes. He said the championship race could potentially be held at a different venue, like Homestead, maybe Vegas, maybe Darlington, but admittedly, he said that it's very hard to replicate the atmosphere and the crowd that is brought out at Phoenix consistently. When talking directly about Homestead, he said that NASCAR is going to keep a very close eye on the attendance for the spring race in 2025, the TV ratings in 2025, and those numbers will determine kind of where NASCAR goes for a championship race in 2026. So if you really want the championship race to be at Homestead, go to the race next year. The last major talking point from the State of the Sport address is the age-old question, will we have a new OEM in NASCAR anytime soon? Steve Phelps reiterated that they've been having a number of discussions with multiple OEMs. He wouldn't specify which ones they've been talking to, but overall, he's cautiously optimistic that we will see, if not 1, but 2 new OEMs in the sport. He feels they're actually really close to striking a deal with one of the OEMs, and also points out that their magic number of OEMs competing in the sport is 5. So again, we might not be looking at 1 new manufacturer, but potentially 2. Of course, integrating a new manufacturer into the sport takes years, it takes time, so ultimately none of this is immediate, but then again, citing that they are close to signing a potential deal with a new OEM to put them in the sport. Again, timeline is not disclosed, but something interesting to hear that they are at least close to a deal. What do you all think of the preliminary injunction denial and what was discussed in the State of the Sport address? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, for more NASCAR news, more information about us, go to AboveTheYellowLine.com and check us out on our social media pages. Before you go, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this all with your friends and family. Thank you all so much for watching this episode of Above the Yellow Line. And until next time, I'll see ya. Bye.